to the Chosen to Speak podcast, where your voice, your truth is valued. I'm the CEO Trend, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we'll be diving deep right into the story of my life. I come before you all in an act of obedience to the instructions and assignment God has given me. I realize that the spiritual gift God gave me is free, and that gift is my voice. He's been urging me to tell my story, but I've just been too hesitant to do so. But I pray for the strength and courage, which is how and why I'm sitting here before you all today. Just a disclaimer, I'm not here to victimize myself or criticize anyone else. I'm just simply standing in my truth and using my voice to speak it. It is everything that I've went through that has molded, shaped, and made me into who I am today. This is a timeline of significant events that date all the way back to when I was a kid. So to start, let's rewind back to my childhood and upbringing. Before I get into it, I just want to let you all know that I will be reading from this device because I have already pre-written my story and I wanted to give it to you all as it is in the timeline in which it is, making sure that I share all the details. So if I'm looking up and down, that explains why. After the first couple episodes, which are dedicated to me sharing my story, you'll no longer see this device and I'll be hosting this podcast in its purest form. So with that being said, I present to you episode 1. Let's rewind back to my childhood and upbringing. Now, I come from a big family, but we are all broken up. Everyone has those members in the family whom they are close with, and we all come together for a big family dinner on major holidays, or unfortunately, we see each other at funerals, and that pretty much explains our family dynamic. I'm closer with my mom's side of the family than my dad's because although both my parents are from Chicago, they were never together, so I didn't get a chance to grow up in a two-parent household. I didn't realize how much this affected me until I got older. I was born and raised in Chicago mainly by my mother, who served as my primary parent. My dad lived in Mississippi my whole life. He later married and had kids of his own. I spent every summer in Mississippi with my dad, or he also come to Chicago to visit me on special occasions like my birthday. I grew up in a Christian household on both sides. As my mom was very active in the church, my dad was a minister and a gospel artist. Honestly, I can't pinpoint where, when, or what went wrong to change the dynamic of my mom and I's relationship because I was way too young to have done anything to my mother to make her treat me in certain ways that she did. But our relationship has always been rocky. It still is to this day. And I never understood if all this was because my mother didn't want me or if this is just who she was. But there was no doubt that she loved me. I mean, no doubt at all. I don't think anything my mother has done to me has been out of evil, ill intent, or at least I would hope not. But let's be for real. My mother had me at the young age of 19. So was she prepared for me? Most likely not. Did she want a kid? Probably not. So there's a possibility that she resented me, which reflected in a mental, emotional, and physical abusive parent-to-child relationship. There are many vivid stories I could tell to paint the picture, but for the sake of privacy, I will not disclose them. To say the least, gentle parenting was the opposite of her parenting style. My dad had the gentle parenting type of style. But no matter what, I was still a mama's girl. And I knew I didn't want to live in Mississippi with my dad and his side of the family. But now that I'm older, looking back, I can understand that my mom was just a young girl trying to figure things out. But growing up, all I knew was fear, control, and consequences. And that shaped me in ways I didn't fully realize until I got older. I grew up scared of my mom because I didn't know what she was capable of. I didn't know if how she was had a limit. Being that young, I wouldn't have ever been able to understand that I was being raised by a single young girl who was figuring this parenting thing out as each day came. My mother was cool at times because she was young, but she was also very strict, controlling, and had a known temper. You knew not to play with her. I got yelled at and cursed out at times, even when I didn't do anything to provoke it. As a kid, being whooped was usually the first form of punishment, or I had to stand in a corner. Then when I got old enough to comprehend, talk, and write, it would be writing the given sentence over and over on line paper, front and back until the stack of paper and all the lines were filled. Getting my iPad taken or physical punishment, and sometimes all of the above. Then from 8th grade on, if I wasn't getting my butt whooped, I was getting my phone and iPad taken for unreasonable long periods of time. So I grew up more isolated than I already was as the only child. Was I a perfect, innocent kid? No. But I've always been a good kid, and anybody can tell you that. I was not a problem child. I've always listened well, been one who could entertain themselves, studious, kept good grades, didn't get in trouble at school, did my chores, and I wasn't even one you had to repeat yourself to. I may have developed a smart mouth over time, but much of what I did in comparison to the punishments I received were excessive, extensive, and unnecessary. So while I was dealing with all that, the strict rules, the punishments, and feeling like nothing I ever did was enough, my mom was also doing what she thought was best to protect me. But in trying so hard to keep me from certain things, she also kept me from feeling like I could trust and open up to her. My mom did her best to shield and protect me from a lot because she always said she didn't want me to be like her. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to spend the night at people's houses, hang out with people unless they, met my mom. I had a bedtime and people weren't allowed to come over our house, only a select few. And I had a strict curfew once I was old enough. My mother would often say, "You can always talk to me, but this is not someone I grew up wanting to or knowing how to talk to." It was hard being raised by someone who always told you to take accountability, but it seemed as though they couldn't even do the same. So I was one who slid notes under my mother's doors because I was too afraid to talk to her until I was old enough to have a device and send her texts. And because I never really felt seen or heard at home, I started looking for that connection elsewhere. But the places I turned to weren't always the best. And that's where a lot of my struggles began. I was introduced to explicit sexual content and self fornication and pleasuring at a very young age by a family member close in age. I even grew up thinking I liked girls because of the things I saw on that screen. Not to mention, growing up in a Black household, playing house exposed me to a lot, which raised my curiosity and had me and other family members close in age doing things that we had no business doing. I was definitely curious George. And as I grew into my teenage years, I became sneaky because my whole life I was so sheltered. I barely even had the chance to make mistakes and learn from them. I was dibbling and dabbling in liquor as young as 12, started smoking at 13. In middle school is when I started battling with my mental health, lost my virginity at the young age of 15, which put me at risk to being sexually assaulted and coerced on numerous occasions. And I just went on a spiral from there. Talking to and messing around with different boys intrigued me because it gave me a temporary sense of love in which I had never felt. My broken perception of love landed me in a toxic relationship with a 25-year-old at the young age of 17, an unhealthy relationship that I was stuck in for 2.5 years. You'll learn more details about that in another episode. I was the only child, never really had any friends, wasn't close with family. Dad lived across states, and home just didn't feel like home. So I never had felt that sense of belonging. And I was lost looking for love and validation in all the wrong places. And no matter what I did, nothing ever seemed to be enough to please my mom. And that's all I ever wanted to do. Despite all, my mom still poured everything that she had into me. She kept me busy, kept me involved, and made sure I had opportunities that could shape my future. And for a while, these activities served as something that was like a way to escape the reality of everything I was dealing with. One thing about my mom, she invested her all into me because I was her only child. Not only did I go to school, but I was involved in a lot of activities such as violin lessons, voice lessons, tumbling, dance classes, and acting. I started dancing when I was 3 years old and kept on until I got injured at 16. And overall, the entertainment world was my life. The performing arts studio and the many stages I performed on, it was a home away from home for me. It was an escape away from my reality, but it didn't take the pain away. Running became my only way out. I became a runaway child at middle school age years and continued all throughout high school. I wasn't running away to be sneaky or have my way. I ran in fear. Anytime I felt uncertain, threatened, or sensed that I was in trouble, I ran, and I ran with no destination. When I ran, it wasn't with the intention to be found. I just wanted to escape all that I was going through in my physical reality. One day, my mom tried to take my phone, and I charged out of the door. It was a cold November night. I ran without thinking, so I didn't have shoes or a coat on. My feet were freezing cold as I tracked through the ice on the ground. I started to shiver, lose breath, and lose sight in the darkness, and I felt that the safest place I could go to was the nearest thing in sight, which was a park. I hid under the slide, crying, panting, gasping for air, and at that point I started to get several phone calls, and shortly after that I was blinded by headlights of a car, and guess what? It was the police. Another time, my mom tried to send me to live with my dad in Mississippi. She'd already arranged for him to come pick me up, so I knew he was coming whether I wanted to go or not. The day he was supposed to arrive, she took my iPhone and gave me a flip phone instead. We were living in these high-rise apartments, so you didn't have to leave the building to take the trash out because there was a trash chute on each floor. So I did my usual chore of taking the trash out. I shouted, "Mom, I'll be right back." Took the trash down the hall, dropped it in the chute, ran down the staircase, and immediately after I charged out the door and ran away. But this time, I was gone for days, and no one was in communication with me, so I was unable to be found. And I recently asked my mom, "What happened? in regards to why I never end up going to Mississippi when she tried to send me to live with my dad. And she said that I ran away and I was gone so long that my dad left Chicago and returned back home to Mississippi because it was only supposed to be a turnaround trip. And I know that this isn't safe, but I just couldn't help it. Whenever I felt at risk at home, I'd take flight. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't outrun what I was feeling inside. The fear, the sadness, the confusion, it all stayed with me. And over time, that weight got heavier and heavier until I didn't even know how to carry it anymore. I cried a lot from the time I was born, but people just thought, oh, she's a crybaby. Oftentimes I cried, I didn't even know why I was crying. Then I started growing up and realizing I had a reason to cry now. But other times I couldn't even conceptualize or identify why I was crying. I just knew I had developed an uncontrollable, lingering sadness. This feeling wasn't always necessarily triggered by something, so I subconsciously knew that something was wrong, but never really knew anything was wrong until I started trying to self-harm as a result of what I was feeling on a day-to-day basis. I started feeling like I didn't want to live. I started to despise life before I even got a chance to really live it. And once I learned what depression meant, I quickly realized that's what I was experiencing. But my mom said I was self-diagnosing myself, so she didn't take it seriously at first. Then one day, my mom noticed a pattern of me wearing long sleeve shirts. So she grabbed me by the arm, rolled up my sleeve, and seen several cuts on my wrist and arm. She took my phone and said that had to be the reason. She never tried to understand what I was going through. She just put me in therapy and told me to use the resources available to me. I've had several psych evaluations, all of which diagnosed me with major depression, which later grew into anxiety disorder. I've always refused medication because I didn't want to become reliant on them, nor did I know how they make me feel. My mom never accepted or acknowledged the diagnosis. She always told me it was all in my head and learn how to maintain emotional control. I experienced occasional sleep paralysis, had a habit of overthinking, couldn't shake this persistent sadness and anxiousness, didn't want to live, and had no one to understand or support me through this. I knew that it was only so much that I could tell the therapist that would be kept confidential. So in many of my sessions, I felt too hesitant to really speak my truth because the truth would either get me taken away from my mom or get me put in a mental institution, or maybe both. So guess what? I never really got the help that I needed. But even with all the struggles I faced, I knew I had to keep going. So I threw myself into something that seemed like it could be the answer, building for my future. It gave me a sense of purpose and a way to escape. And of course, that came with its own set of challenges. I started my entrepreneurial journey at 14 and experienced great success. I graduated high school a year ahead of my class, went to college right away, but soon realized it wasn't for me. I then chose to pursue entrepreneurship while working part-time. I was making an abundance of money and creating stability at a young age. I understood how to prioritize, was good with money, and was overall very responsible. I worked hard and stacked everything I earned. All the free time I spent was creating, building, and working towards my dream lifestyle. My maturity, experiences, and financial stability paved the way for me to move out of my mom's home into my own place at 18 years old. You'll learn about this in the next episode. But despite all the experience, success, and independence I gained so young, something was still missing. There was still this void that I couldn't fill, the love and emotional support that I longed for from my mom. I yearned for my mother's love, but I never received it because, as she often said, I don't have the capacity for this, in which I believe she was referring to mental and emotional support. She provided me with the basic necessities I needed as a child and did the very best she could in parenting me. The nurturing is what was missing. My mother used to always say, "You don't receive from me." But it's not that I didn't hear her or process what she was saying, it's just how it was presented. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Not to mention, it's always just been a household of me and my mom. So she's the only voice I ever knew or heard. And I got tired of it. There are many things a mother just can't teach. Some things are exclusive to the father's role. The support and teaching I needed that only a father could give, I didn't get because there was only so much that my dad could do from a distance. And I used to hold resentment towards my dad because I thought many mistakes I made and things I endured were a result as to what he did not teach me. But I later realized that my dad taught me all he knew, which was God. That's what worked for him and changed his life, so he shared that with me. And once I told myself this is as good as it's going to get from both parties, there was a deeper layer of issues that I was left to confront within myself. No matter what either of my parents' parenting style was like, I was very disciplined. So all they did, whether good or bad, worked. I mean, I'm laughing, but serious. I mean, I turned out to be a mature, ambitious, hardworking, God-fearing, introverted individual. However, childhood left me with a lot of unresolved, unhealed trauma. That confused, sad, and broken feeling just couldn't be shaken. Childhood were the days I thought I'd never overcome or get past. I thought those days would last forever. I thought I'd die in the midst of those days. I couldn't see past the days in which I was living, so it was hard to imagine life at 18 or any older. The memory of those days still haunt and trigger me. In fact, I'm still healing from childhood trauma. I faced much adversity growing up, but I always had a subconscious feeling that I was special and that all that I was going through wasn't for nothing. As much as I tried to understand why things were the way they were, I had to face the unresolved pain and begin the journey of healing. Now, all of this serves as part of my story and testimony. And this wraps up episode 1, where we have rewinded back to my childhood and upbringing. I know some of the topics discussed may have been triggering, but I really do hope you enjoyed. So thank you all for tuning into the Chosen to Speak podcast, where your voice, your truth is valued. If you enjoyed this week's episode, be sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more. Be sure to come back next Friday at 7 p.m. Central for another episode where I'll be talking about my journey of moving out at 18 and living alone. In the meantime, stay connected with us on TikTok at Chosen to Speak Podcast.